Batya, what's on your radar?
The idea that working class Americans who vote for Republicans are voting against their economic interests has become dogma for Democrats. For the life of them, progressives and liberals can't understand why their proposals for an expanded welfare state don't appeal to the millions of blue-collar workers in former Union strongholds who turned states like West Virginia red. The response from many on the right has been to point out that people don't vote on economic issues as much as they do on cultural ones. And the left's cultural battles against traditional gender roles, the nuclear family, and gun rights, and for things like late-term abortions and children of different races being put in different affinity groups in school, have alienated conservatives to such a degree that they would be willing to sacrifice benefits like free childcare, paid sick leave, minimum wage hikes, and union protections at the altar of their values. Certainly there's some truth to this. A YouGov American Compass survey of 3,000 workers found that, quote, excessive engagement in politics is the #1 obstacle to a robust American labor movement. Among those who said they would vote against a union, the top reason cited was union political activity, followed by member dues, the survey found. The authors write, quote, these workers anticipate that unions will focus on politics rather than delivering concrete benefits in their workplaces and don't want to pay the cost. Interestingly, fear of retaliation for union organizing was the least cited reason workers gave for why they haven't unionized. There's an important message here for progressives who care about workers' rights. The truth is that many of America's workers aren't progressive. In an emerging class chasm, Democrats and progressives have become the side of highly educated urban professionals, while the laboring class is increasingly made up of people who find more in common with Republicans, especially the populists among the Republicans. A Bloomberg News analysis from 2020 found that among the occupations that gave the most money to Donald Trump's campaign were truckers, construction workers, carpenters, builders, electricians, cops, mechanics, and maintenance employees. Biden tellingly got the lion's share of teachers, professors, therapists, lawyers, HR department staff, finance professionals, and bankers. Something's off when the left is losing janitors and gaining bankers. Progressives who truly care about labor need to suck it up and learn how to care about people who voted for Trump and how to make the labor movement compatible with their cultural values. But as important is the fact that a lot of what we call cultural battles are actually economic ones, or at least they have an economic side to them. Take the question of marriage. The idea that marriage is a positive value and an important grounding unit for families, society, and the nation more broadly is decidedly outre on the left, where marriage is viewed as an outdated institution. But the debate about the value of marriage isn't just a cultural one or a religious one, it's also one with huge economic ramifications. Because married people earn considerably more than those who aren't married, by as much as 30%. And this is true across racial groups, while the racial earnings gap persists across the board. Married black men out-earn single white men and single white women. The median income for married heads of black households is over $90,000 compared to just $38,000 for their unmarried counterparts. The poverty rate for black Americans in 2020 was nearly 20%, but for black married couples, it was just 6%. Meanwhile, it is now uncontroversial among economists that children raised by two parents do better than children raised in any other family structure. A state's share of married parents is the best predictor of upward mobility for poor kids, a better predictor than race or college education. Of course, it's difficult to say whether the link between marriage and higher earnings is causation or correlation. Some economists have argued that people with greater earning potential compete better in the marriage market, while others have argued that married people climb the job ladder faster. Still, others have argued that married men work harder. And meanwhile, many poor and working class people feel that they just can't afford to get married. Whatever its cause, the economic rewards of getting married and staying married is something the upper crusts know well. The class divide in America is as much a marriage divide as it is an educational one. College-educated affluent Americans are overwhelmingly likely to be married, while working class and poor families are living increasingly precarious lives, both economically and in terms of their family relationships. Just 11% of babies born to college-educated women are born out of wedlock, as opposed to over 50% of babies born to women who never went to college and over 64% of women who are poor. Just 26% of poor families and 39% of working class families are married, compared to 56% of middle and upper class ones. There's a deep and troubling irony to the fact that the very people taking advantage of the marriage bank account boon are the ones discouraging it in others, downplaying its importance in the economic mobility of poor children. The very people taking advantage of the economic benefits of marriage are frequently the ones to cast an attachment to marriage as a sign of cultural backwardness. Working class Americans may not have the data at their disposal to argue for the economic benefits of marriage, but they have eyes. They can see what's right in front of them in their communities, which families are making it and which families are not. And it's impossibly grating to have a bunch of rich married liberals accusing them of selling out their economic interests by focusing on the very thing that might actually help secure a better future for their children. Marriage is only one of the many issues in which a class war is masquerading as a culture war. Think about the vaccine mandates, which have pitted the work-from-home crowd against essential workers. Or think of the battle over Build Back Better. Moderate Democrats Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who blocked the bill in the Senate, were excoriated by their progressive colleagues for supposedly not caring about their most vulnerable constituents. How could they deny them things like universal pre-K that was promised in the bill, especially when the pandemic has forced so many women out of the workforce with shuttered schools and daycare centers? The fight over government-subsidized childcare is frequently cast as a cultural issue by the left, as part of the battle for gender equality. Lost in the conversation is the fact that pre-K and other government programs that subsidize a two-income family are in effect perpetuating the need for two incomes to keep a middle-class family afloat. In a very real way, these programs have normalized what Elizabeth Warren used to call the two-income trap, whereby the nominal gains of having two incomes have been swallowed by a corresponding increase in costs, which Democrats now propose the government subsidize. But working class families are not necessarily better off with two parents in the workforce and subsidized childcare than they would be with an economy that provided upward mobility for a family living on a single income, the way that the American economy did in the 1970s. Certainly, this is a question working class people can be trusted to adjudicate for themselves. One thing is for sure, when members of progressive elites tell you working class Americans struggling to support their families in a dignified manner are choosing culture war issues over their economic interests, bear in mind that the truth is almost the exact opposite. It's the elites who are waging cultural battles, ones that benefit them economically. Now, Robbie, I know that you are a libertarian and probably disagree with everything I just said, so let's have it out.
Everything you just said, but I get uncomfortable about obviously using government incentives and pushing to force people into social arrangements. I mean, obviously, I think marriage is a good thing for a lot of people. I'm married. I think you're married. Children. The data is just what the data says, right? Children are better off raised by two parents. Then the question becomes what, if anything, or how much should we actively encourage or stigmatize an alternative arrangement? And that's probably where we disagree. I'm not in love with. Look, I understand it's gotten much more expensive to raise children because the cost of childcare, healthcare, those kinds of things are suffering cost disease. They just keep getting more and more and more and more expensive. And so a lot of the things that you need to raise a child are labor intensive, or the services. So it's more costly to raise children, even as the cost of other things, food and TVs and internet service, all those things have gotten cheaper and generally more affordable even for lower class people. But the child specific stuff hasn't. So maybe government's got to do something about that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I would land on that. I did see this. You mentioned pre-K. And there was this fascinating report just this week that I was going to maybe talk about it at Radar, and I never got around to it, from the Hetchinger report. This is a study of a state-funded pre-K program in Tennessee that found that the kids in this program by sixth grade were doing worse than their peers in terms of disciplinary issues and academic achievement. And a lot of people were talking about this on Twitter. A lot of liberals were talking about this, being like, wait a minute, is universal pre-K bad? Right. So it might just be a problem with this one program, but I think that's kind of what you were getting at. Obviously, if low-income kids are in like abusive or really bad households, then it's better for them to be in pre-K. But for a lot of, it's not necessarily better to be in pre-K than to just be at home or in a loving home. So liberals have been really pushing pre-K, or like the idea that everyone should be being raised by the state at all times, when I'd rather have those kids with their families for as long as possible.
Yeah, and I think there's just so many other ways we can imagine thinking about economic mobility for the people in America who are struggling. For example, the huge amount of power that corporations have over the people who work for them, and increasingly these massive corporations are, America's number one employers. And just looking at the data, it just seems to me that why are we leaning into the problem, which is that you can no longer support a family in a dignified manner with a single income because of you probably disagree with this, but because of the massive power that corporations have and the downward mobility of the working class, we're leaning into the problem as opposed to finding better solutions and getting back to a time of more economic mobility like we had in the 70s.
I mean, but some things are affordable, and maybe not in New York and in DC, but in the heart where the places where ordinary working people live. Like I was just saying, the cost of many goods have gone down over time. But the labor-intensive, the education, medical costs, other things like that, those have gotten way worse. I would argue all the things the government is involved in providing have gotten extraordinarily more expensive. Doesn't matter how much we try to fix it. Doesn't matter how much money we put into the problem. See, the cost spirals out of control. Maybe there's a lesson in that. I don't know.
All right. Looking forward to your radar next, Robbie.
Thank you.